The goal of this study was to identify where collective philanthropy could best support and align with the Timorese government's own education priorities. The study itself took us 8 months. It was a fairly intensive process. We did desk research looking at over 50 reports. We had the opportunity to sit down with government ministers, with civil society leaders, with researchers, and with funders. This included overall 30 deep dive consultations with stakeholders and a dedicated field visit to Timor Leste to see the opportunities and the challenges firsthand. We were aiming to understand the government's strategic priorities, to understand what's working and what challenges remain, and to really try and build up a picture of the reality from multiple lenses. It's worth saying that due to resource constraints, Timor-Leste is not a hugely data-rich context. So interviews were absolutely critical in terms of building up that picture. And we're really grateful to many of the advisors and informants, some of whom I can see on this call. And I know we have on this call deep knowledge of the Timorese context. And so I hope you'll forgive me being an outsider and providing this overview. So first of all, I'd like to just pick out a few contextual factors to paint a picture and share some context of Timor-Leste. Timor-Leste is a new nation formed after independence just over 20 years ago. It's the poorest country in Southeast Asia and is rebuilding after decades of occupation and conflict. It's a new member of the WTO and ASEAN, and the country is at a pivotal moment. Just a few things to mention to give you the context. Most development indicators are below regional averages, and so we have a relatively lower life expectancy based on the Southeast Asian average, and it's low on the Human Development Index. There are challenges in terms of the economic situation. It remains fragile and in a post-conflict state, and the oil-based economy, the oil dominates the economy, and many other aspects of the economy are rather more stagnant. We have youth unemployment, which contributes to some social vulnerability. Multidimensional poverty, with people lacking access to education, healthcare, and basic infrastructure, is a key feature. We have many children who are undernourished. And of course, Timor-Leste is vulnerable to natural disasters, floods, droughts, landslides. We've just seen from a thunderstorm, which is affecting our connectivity today, which can amplify sometimes economic challenges because of damage to existing infrastructure and physical assets, which can sometimes threaten food security. Moving on then to the core of our study, which is to really understand the education system, and starting with learning outcomes. It's an important caveat to make that assessment data is quite limited, but the data that we have does highlight a critical challenge that learning outcomes remain low. Looking at early grades, we have an indicator in 2019 that 70% of children failed the EGRA test, which assesses early grade reading. So that is 7 out of 10 children who have the ability and the will to learn, but just haven't yet had their potential unlocked. When we then move on to basic and secondary school, many students are performing poorly, particularly in mathematics. And it's worth highlighting here that the multilingual context makes the job of a teacher quite challenging. Tetum and Portuguese are the main language of instruction at school, with many students and teachers also communicating in a home language. English and Indonesian are recognized as working languages. So you have a multilingual context where many children are coming to school with language skills, but not necessarily the ones that they are being taught in. And so that provides a challenge for teachers as children acquire the basics of literacy and numeracy. The government has been strongly prioritising investments in education as a key step to rebuilding the system after decades of conflict and after independence. At independence, it's worth noting that many schools were badly damaged and the teaching workforce depleted. However, basic education has been made a top priority by this government, and now net enrolment rates are up to 76%, which is regionally, it's a good figure, and dropout is lower than global averages. Investments have been made in school resources and improved facilities, as well as connections, fibre optic cables and Starlink, which is set to increase connectivity and lower costs. Although it should be noted, and we'll come on to this, much more investment is needed. A new curriculum has been designed and is in place at lower grades and is in progress for higher grades. More is needed to embed that and make it really work for the system, but huge progress has been made in terms of curriculum reform. And in-service training and teacher training is run by InfoDepe, part of the government infrastructure, as well as in partnership with other development partners and other partners. And the government is committed to improving assessment with EGRA and EGMA, early grade reading tests and early grade mathematics tests being planned for later this year. And Timor is the most recent joiner to the Southeast Asia testing primary learning metrics study. So what did we find in our report? And there is much more detail in the report that you'll have access to at the end of this. But I really just wanted to show some mapping that we did across the system, looking at from the bottom up, the different levels of the education system from preschool through to basic, into secondary and technical and vocational education and training, and looking across the system at curriculum and assessment, looking at workforce, and looking at infrastructure and resources. And we would say that there is acute need for investment across the system. Timor Leste is a small country with a constrained budget, and despite progress, there is still a great deal of work to be done across the board. Just to highlight a few dimensions, early childhood provision is limited, with only 36% of children eligible for any placement in a setting or any support. And the government has set targets of 60% enrolment by 2028. And as I mentioned, although the government has its own professional development division, and there are many government development partner funded programs, these programs in themselves are unable to meet the growing demand alone. And so there are implementation challenges. And then finally, a point to highlight, as you may have seen from the pictures in my last slide, investing in school infrastructure is a really critical need. According to the Ministry of Education, only half of basic education classrooms are in a good condition. Our findings very much reflect the government priorities that have been articulated in the most recent development plans. So government plans really focus on at preschool level, scaling up preschool education for greater access to all children. At basic level, as we noted, enrolment is doing well, but really embedding the quality of basic education through curriculum, embedding the curriculum and through teacher training. At secondary has been an area where there has been less investment previously. And so expanding access to high quality relevant courses to equip students with the skills they need for higher education, jobs and entrepreneurship. And then similarly at TVET, making sure that programs align with economic demands. And some cross-cutting investment needs are improved school infrastructure and better data and management information systems. I wanted to just highlight the complex development partner landscape. As you can see here, there have been many players working in the system. And for those of you who aren't aware, Timor has about 1.3 million people, so a small population with a high youth population, so about 450,000 at that youth population level. And despite the small size of the system, there are lots of development partners present, including bilateral agencies, multilaterals, a range of international NGOs and local NGOs. Private philanthropy to date has been fairly limited, and obviously that's an area that we want to come on and talk about. In any context, coordination and alignment can be challenging because the system's ability to absorb support in a way that builds sustainability can be an insurmountable barrier if that's not done well. And so one of our learnings is that working closely and ideally in direct partnership with government yields the most promising results. I'd like to move now on to what we see as the investment case for Timor Leste. We believe that Timor Leste presents a really distinctive opportunity, a compelling opportunity for philanthropy. If we think about Timor's position in the Southeast Asian context, as I mentioned, it is Southeast Asia's poorest country, and ASEAN membership makes the prosperity and development of the country socially, economically, and democratically a material consideration for stability and growth in the whole region. So Timor's development is important to Southeast Asia. The partnership conditions are right. The Ministry of Education, as you'll see shortly when we move into our panel, is highly engaged, open-minded, and has a strong imperative for education development. And although bandwidth is limited, there's a strong appetite to learn from experts, to learn from good practice and from evidence-based approaches across the region and the world. There's also an opportunity, a real opportunity to deliver tangible results. The size of the system with just under 1.4 million people means that a relatively small investment can go a long way. And despite some complexity, implementation is manageable. And it's possible to trial and demonstrate the efficacy of interventions that perhaps have been tried in different contexts. There's also an important opportunity to demonstrate a model for philanthropic partnership. 2025 saw, as I'm sure everyone on this call will be aware, saw huge instability in the international education funding landscape, with USAID and other funder cancellations all over the world impacting low and middle income countries, including Timor Leste. And this is a major threat, but it also provides an opportunity to work differently, thinking about an intentional and efficient approach to resource mobilization and deployment, thinking about how you really put government in the driving seat and thinking about effective collaboration when there aren't enough resources, we have to work together. So this report has informed the approach by the Education Collective for Timor Leste that you're going to hear more about in a moment when we move into the panel. And that group of funders has come together to think about what it is that will make philanthropy and an effective model work really well to deliver for the young people of Timor Leste. Some factors that have been identified. Evidence of impact is a really important driving factor in both in terms of deciding what to fund, but also in terms of being purposeful about the measurement of impact. And so that's a key piece in what the Education Collective will believe to be important. Fundamentally, there is a desire to work with the government and within the ecosystem. So building on successes, leveraging existing infrastructure, leveraging existing networks and capabilities. And this really means consulting on investments and co-designing projects and being mindful of where other funders and partners are already working. This should help to minimize duplication and complexity, which has often been a real barrier to delivering effective education interventions. And then the final piece that this group would really like to test is to think about how philanthropy can be catalytic. Often philanthropy has the opportunity to take on earlier stage, potentially riskier projects through supporting innovation, through supporting piloting and rigorous testing of new approaches, understanding that context can be complex. And so sometimes it's important to try new things. But the overall goal is to help the ministry identify what works best for Timor-Leste's context, looking at what's going to be effective, scalable, sustainable within national budgets and workforce capabilities, and to de-risk the early stages of projects, and pave the way ultimately for long-term system-led improvements to the system. So just before I move into the panel, I wanted to highlight a few areas where the Ministry of Education and the Education Collective for Timor-Leste, which is powered by Dreams Asia and the Octava Foundation, have commenced a co-development process to shape some programs, and we'll hear more about those in a moment. 3 areas here that I wanted to highlight. The Education Collective has already started to invest in supporting early childhood education in Timor-Leste through initially some technical support to a conference that happened in September, the Early Childhood Development Conference. And during this, we identified the potential to explore some alternative models of early childhood provision, leveraging community capabilities. And alongside this, the collective is supporting a multilingual program, which helps children to master literacy using mother tongue-based instruction, which has been shown to prepare children well for school in the official languages of Tetum and Portuguese. Secondly, teacher training, school leadership capacity. Although there are several partners involved in this, our analysis indicates that there is still considerable scope for philanthropic support. And we're looking particularly at school leadership and mentoring to improve school performance and learning outcomes, support for both pre-service and in-service, particularly to help implement the new curriculum alongside high-quality pedagogical approaches. And then finally, school infrastructure, given the uneven distribution of classrooms and the variable quality of construction, really dating back from the time of independence. The Education Collective is exploring projects and programs that can develop standardized and replicable school construction models, really to provide access to safe, inclusive, durable learning environments that are a cornerstone of children being able to access high quality education.